The sound of ripping fabric echoed through the Wilcox homestead as Margaret's last shred of dignity was torn away. Her mother-in-law's voice cutting deeper than the cold Wyoming air against her bare skin. "Show us where you've hidden his letters, whore." 3 years of careful silence shattered like ice on a spring river. They could strip her clothes, but they couldn't strip away what she knew: ledgers of bribes, names of officials bought, bodies buried where the railroad would soon pass. Outside, Emma Blackwood heard the screams from her horse, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle strapped to her saddle. She'd sworn, after burying her husband and unborn child, that she'd never again involve herself in others' miseries. 3 years of isolation had taught her that survival meant keeping to herself, keeping her head down. But some sounds change a person's destiny. This one, a woman's desperate plea between sobs, pulled Emma from her saddle toward the Wilcox door, each step betraying the careful walls she'd built around what remained of her heart. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Emma Blackwood rose before dawn, as she had every day since Jacob's death, 3 years to the day. The November chill cut through her woolen shirt as she saddled her mare, the leather creaking in the pre-dawn silence. Behind her, the bunkhouse remained dark. Her ranch hands knew better than to approach her before breakfast, especially today. "Mornin', Miss Blackwood," nodded Hank, her foreman, emerging unexpectedly from the barn. Emma merely tipped her hat in response. Words were scarce things, best saved for necessity. By mid-morning, she'd ridden into Redemption Creek, tying her horse outside the cattle broker's office. Inside, 3 men paused their conversation, pipe smoke hanging like fog between them. "Miss Blackwood," Simon Miller gestured to a chair she didn't take. "Didn't expect to see you in town so soon after." "I've got 20 head ready for market," she interrupted. "Prime stock." Miller exchanged glances with the others. "Markets ain't what they were. Best I can offer is $12 a head." "16, Emma said flatly. "Same as Wilcox got last week." "Thaddeus Wilcox runs a proper operation with men to—" "My cattle are healthier, and you know it." Her voice remained level, betraying nothing of the fire underneath. As she negotiated, memories sliced through her like the telegram that had arrived 3 years ago. Jacob face down at Gettysburg. The child lost in a wash of blood upon hearing the news. The bankers circling like vultures until she'd shown them her rifle and her ledgers with equal conviction. Outside, she caught fragments of whispered conversation from women at the mercantile. Unnatural. A woman alone like that. Dresses like a man half the time. No wonder she lost the baby. Emma tightened her mare's cinch with unnecessary force. $15 a head. Better than she'd expected. Enough to survive another season. Taking the back trail home past the Wilcox property would save an hour's ride. As she approached the weathered homestead, a woman's scream split the air. Emma reined her horse sharply, listening. Perhaps just a domestic quarrel, not her concern. Another scream. Then a man's voice. "Hold her down, boys." Emma dismounted, approaching the window cautiously. Inside, a young woman lay pinned across a table by 2 men, while an older woman tore at her clothing. "Where are the papers, you Boston whore?" The older woman slapped the younger across her exposed breasts. "What else did you steal while my son was away?" "Nothing." Emma's hand moved to her rifle, then stopped. The Wilcoxes were the most powerful family in the territory. Getting involved meant trouble she couldn't afford. The young woman's eyes suddenly locked with Emma's through the window, desperate, pleading. 3 years of minding her own business, 3 years of survival through isolation. Emma checked her rifle, then kicked in the door. "That's enough," she said, leveling the barrel at the startled family. "You're coming with me," said the lone rancher after her in-laws took off all her clothes, draping her own duster around the trembling woman's shoulders. The woman shivered violently, despite the blanket Emma had wrapped around her shoulders. Night had fallen by the time they reached Blackwood Ranch, the woman barely conscious against Emma's back during the ride. "What's your name?" Emma asked, helping her dismount. "Margaret," she whispered, knees buckling. "Margaret Wilcox." Emma's stomach tightened. Thaddeus Wilcox's wife. She'd just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in the territory. Inside the cabin, Emma lit the lamps and stoked the fire before examining her unexpected guest. Margaret's face bore older bruises beneath today's fresh marks. Red welts crossed her back, and fingerprint bruises circled both arms. "I need to clean these," Emma said, retrieving her medical kit, supplies left from her time following the army as a laundress. The lie she'd told while dressing as a man to stay near Jacob. Margaret flinched at her touch, but remained silent as Emma applied iodine and bandages. "Why did you help me?" she finally asked, blue eyes searching Emma's face. "Couldn't leave you there." Emma kept her tone neutral, clinical. "There's a spare room. Clothes in the chest might fit. I'll bring food. Later." Emma lay awake, listening to the muffled sobs from the next room, near midnight. Margaret's cries turned to screams. Emma found her thrashing against invisible restraints, still trapped in nightmare. "You're safe," Emma said awkwardly, standing in the doorway. "Nobody's here but us." Margaret's eyes opened, wild with fear, then slowly focused. "I'm sorry." Emma nodded and turned to leave. "Please," Margaret whispered. "Could you stay? Just until I fall asleep?" Emma hesitated, then sat stiffly in the chair beside the bed until Margaret's breathing steadied into sleep. At dawn, Emma found Margaret in the kitchen, wearing a borrowed dress too large for her slender frame, attempting to cook breakfast. "You don't need to serve me," Emma said. "I want to repay your kindness." It wasn't kindness. It was decent behavior. Margaret's hands trembled as she attempted to mend a torn shirt later that morning. Emma watched her struggle before sitting beside her with a sigh. "Like this," she demonstrated, their fingers briefly touching. Emma withdrew her hand as if burned. The arrival of hoofbeats interrupted the strange tension. Sheriff Parker dismounted in the yard, hat in hand. "Miss Blackwood?" He nodded, eyes darting to Margaret. "Mrs. Wilcox's family is concerned about her condition. They say she's been unwell. Confused. I'm perfectly sound of mind, Sheriff," Margaret stated, standing straighter. "Be that as it may, ma'am. Family matters are—" "She's staying," Emma interrupted, "as my guest." After the sheriff departed, Margaret touched Emma's arm lightly. "They won't stop looking for me." "What I know could ruin them. Hold it steady," Emma instructed, adjusting Margaret's grip on the axe. "Let the weight do the work." After a week at Blackwood Ranch, Margaret's hands had developed the first small calluses. The split wood still came slowly, but Emma noted her determination. "In Boston, I never imagined needing such skills," Margaret said, wiping her brow. "In Boston, you probably had servants for this." Margaret smiled sadly. "My father's bankruptcy ended that life rather abruptly." Later, Emma found Margaret at her desk, bent over the ranch's ledgers, pen moving with practiced efficiency. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, alarmed at the intrusion into her private affairs. "Organizing your accounts." Margaret didn't look up. "Your cattle business is quite profitable, but your expense tracking is chaotic." Emma's initial irritation faded as Margaret explained her system. The woman might struggle with an axe, but her mind was sharp as a new blade. "You've had schooling," Emma observed. "Women's seminary. I taught mathematics briefly before." Margaret's voice trailed off, before her father had sold her to Thaddeus Wilcox to settle his debts. Emma surmised. That afternoon, Tom, one of the ranch hands, reported seeing riders watching the property from the ridge. "Wilcox men," he said. "3 of them," Emma nodded. "Double the night watch, and bring my spare revolver from the safe." That evening, Emma led Margaret behind the barn, placing the Colt in her hands. "It's heavier than it looks," Margaret said, surprised. "That'll help with the kick." Emma moved behind her, adjusting her stance, hands positioning Margaret's slender shoulders. The unexpected warmth of their bodies pressed together sent a jolt through Emma that had nothing to do with firearms. She stepped back quickly, unsettled. "Squeeze. Don't pull," she managed. Voice rougher than intended. Margaret's shot went wide, but her second clipped the edge of the can target. "Not bad," Emma said, genuinely impressed. Practice daily. At dawn, they discovered the water hole contaminated, 3 dead cattle nearby. Emma knelt by the murky water, sniffing. "Lie," she concluded. "Enough to poison the herd if they'd drunk deeply." Sheriff Parker's return later that day brought worse news. "Thaddeus Wilcox returns in 2 weeks, he announced, avoiding Margaret's eyes. "He's bringing Judge Hollister with him." "The territorial judge?" Emma frowned. "Thaddeus says his wife needs legal intervention for her condition." After the sheriff departed, Emma's gaze met Margaret's. "Hollister owes Thaddeus," Margaret said quietly. "They all do." That night, Emma stood watch on the porch, rifle across her knees, contemplating how quickly her carefully constructed isolation had crumbled, and why the thought of Margaret being taken filled her with such visceral dread. Lightning fractured the night sky as rain lashed against the cabin windows. Margaret sat rigid in her chair, flinching with each thunderclap. "Just a storm," Emma said. Stoking the fire, another crack of thunder, and Margaret's teacup clattered to the floor as she curled into herself, breath coming in short gasps. "Margaret?" Emma knelt beside her, alarmed by her pallor. "They would." Margaret's voice emerged strangled. "The brothers. When storms came, they said no one would hear." Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. She hesitated, then awkwardly placed her hand over Margaret's clenched fist. "You're at Blackwood Ranch," she said firmly. "I'm Emma Blackwood." "You're safe." Gradually, Margaret's breathing steadied. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." The storm raged on, but something had shifted between them. Words long locked away began to flow. "My father arranged the marriage," Margaret explained, staring into the fire. "His debts were substantial. Thaddeus seemed respectable at first. When did it change? When I couldn't conceive. First came the accusations, then the beatings, then—" She swallowed hard. "He began inviting his brothers to our bed. Said if his seed didn't take, perhaps theirs would." Emma's hand tightened over Margaret's. "I served as a nurse in the war," Emma confessed unexpectedly. "Dressed as a man to follow Jacob. Saw things no one should see. Margaret looked up, surprised. They didn't discover you. Nearly did. After Gettysburg, I'd been injured, but the field surgeon was too overwhelmed to notice much beyond the wound. Emma's voice grew distant. When word came that Jacob had fallen, I collapsed. That's when they found out, not just that I was a woman, but that I was carrying a child. You lost the baby, Margaret said softly. Emma nodded once, sharply. They sent me home, said the shock had caused it. As midnight approached, the storm eased. Margaret retrieved a small packet from her borrowed dress. This is why they were searching me, she said, spreading papers on the table. Copies I made from Thaddeus's study, land deals, bribes to officials, details of accidents that befell homesteaders who refused to sell. Emma examined the meticulous records, then retrieved a leather journal from her trunk. Jacob kept records too, she said. Wilcox sold defective equipment to the Union Army. Men died because of it. Margaret's eyes widened. With the railroad coming through, he's positioned to become the territory's most powerful man, unless someone stops him. Their eyes met across the table, understanding crystallizing between them. If what you've documented is true, Emma said slowly, we're not just fighting for your freedom. We could stop them from taking half the territory. Outside, the storm had passed, but they both knew a greater tempest approached. Redemption Creek's main street fell unnaturally quiet as Emma and Margaret dismounted outside the general store. Women gathered their children closer. Men stopped mid-conversation. Ignore them, Emma murmured, though the hostile stares prickled her skin. Inside, Mrs. Dawson refused to serve them directly, leaving their supplies on the counter without meeting their eyes. I've known you since you were a girl, Emma Blackwood, the woman finally hissed. Your poor mother would weep to see what you've become. And what's that exactly? Emma asked coldly. Corrupting another man's wife, living in sin, living free of beatings. You mean? Margaret interjected, her refined accent cutting through the tension. Outside, a man spat near their horses. Man, woman, he muttered, just loud enough to hear. They rode home in tense silence. As the ranch came into view, Emma noticed the broken fence line immediately. Cattle are scattered, she said grimly. Roundup gear in the barn. Can you ride that long? Margaret nodded. Just show me what to do. They worked through dusk and into darkness, rain beginning as night fell. Emma watched with growing respect as Margaret pushed through exhaustion, following directions without complaint, her Boston education finding practical application in calculating head counts and positioning. Near midnight, drenched and mud-spattered, they herded the last stray back into the repaired fence line. You're a quick study, Emma acknowledged as they unsaddled their horses. I've had an excellent teacher. Margaret's smile transformed her rain-streaked face. Inside. Emma built up the fire while Margaret changed into dry clothes in the bedroom. When she emerged, Emma handed her a mug of whiskey-laced coffee. For the chill, she explained. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, lingering longer than necessary. Emma found herself reaching up to brush a damp strand of hair from Margaret's face. The touch became a caress that neither woman pulled away from. Later, Emma couldn't say who had moved first, only that Margaret's lips were softer than she'd imagined in the thoughts she'd been trying not to have. Morning brought awkward silence as they moved around each other in the kitchen. Finally, Margaret spoke. I've never felt this way before, she said quietly. It frightens me. Emma looked up sharply. Frightens you? Not you, Margaret clarified. The feeling itself, its immensity. Emma's carefully constructed walls crumbled further. I know, she admitted. Me too. Their second kiss was deliberate, chosen rather than stolen. That afternoon, Hank rode in at a gallop. News from town, he reported, eyeing their clasped hands with raised eyebrows, but no comment. Thaddeus hired 3 gunmen from Cheyenne. They arrive on Friday's train. 3 days, Emma calculated. I sent Jackson to the territorial marshal with those papers. Hank continued. But it'll take him at least 5 days to reach Cheyenne and back. After he left, Margaret squeezed Emma's hand. We can leave. Start somewhere new. Emma shook her head. This is my land. I won't be run off it. Then we fight, Margaret said with newfound resolve. Dawn broke blood red over Blackwood Ranch. Emma stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching dust rise from the eastern approach. Margaret emerged from the house, shotgun cradled in her arms, her face pale but determined. Remember what I taught you, Emma said. Not when you're ready, when you have no choice. Margaret nodded. The men are in position? Hank and Tom in the north pasture, others at the creek line. They'd prepared through the night, ammunition distributed, firing positions established, escape routes planned. There's still time for you to hide in the root cellar, Emma offered. My place is with you. 7 riders approached slowly. Emma recognized Thaddeus Wilcox at the head, flanked by his brothers. Behind them rode 3 hard-faced men, the hired guns. Sheriff Parker brought up the rear, looking uncomfortable. The sheriff rode forward alone, a white handkerchief raised. Miss Blackwood, he called. Mr. Wilcox is prepared to be reasonable. All he wants is his wife returned. No charges pressed against you for the misunderstanding. Emma remained silent, but Margaret stepped forward. Would you like to see the scars? Sheriff, she called, voice carrying across the yard. Or shall I describe how the Wilcox brothers amused themselves while Thaddeus watched? The sheriff's face reddened. Mrs. Wilcox, such talk isn't— Enough, Thaddeus shouted. She's deranged. This is why I've brought Judge Hollister's commitment order. The judge might reconsider when the territorial marshal arrives with evidence of your land fraud. Emma replied. Fury twisted Thaddeus's features. Take them, he ordered the gunman. The first shots came from the ridge. Emma dropped to one knee, returning fire with practiced precision. One gunman fell immediately. Another clutched his arm, cursing. Inside, Emma shouted to Margaret as bullets splintered the porch railing. They retreated into the house as riders circled the property. For 20 minutes, intermittent gunfire exchanged. Then silence fell. They're repositioning, Emma whispered, peering through a window. A crash from the back door sent them running. One of the Wilcox brothers had broken through. Margaret fired without hesitation, the shotgun blast throwing him back through the doorway. Emma, as Emma turned toward the front window, pain exploded across her shoulder. A bullet had found its mark through a gap in the shutters. She stumbled, blood spreading across her shirt. Margaret dragged her behind the heavy oak table, quickly binding the wound with strips torn from her petticoat. Keep pressure, she instructed, taking Emma's rifle. Footsteps on the porch. The door splintered inward. Thaddeus Wilcox stood framed in the doorway, pistol raised, face twisted with hatred. I knew you'd corrupt her, he snarled at Emma. She knew what you were, Margaret replied. rifle steady in her hands. A thief, a rapist, a murderer. "You'll hang with her," he promised, stepping forward. As he lunged toward the wounded Emma, knife suddenly in hand, Margaret pulled the trigger. "You're both damned," Thaddeus gasped as he fell, blood spreading across his chest. 6 weeks passed before Emma could raise her arm above shoulder height without pain. Each morning, Margaret changed the bandages, her touch growing more confident with practice. Each evening, they sat before the fire, planning a future neither had imagined possible. "The territorial marshal says the charges against the remaining Wilcoxes will stick," Emma reported, reading the latest letter. "The land deeds will be reviewed." "And us?" Margaret asked quietly. The question hung between them. The Wilcox family had been exposed, but whispers about the two women living alone at Blackwood Ranch persisted. Emma's answer was interrupted by the arrival of riders, their ranch hands escorting a wagon carrying a young woman with a bruised face and a small child. "Found them on the North Road," Hank explained. "Husband left them for dead after a beating. Thought maybe." He trailed off, looking uncertainly between Emma and Margaret. "Bring them inside," Margaret said without hesitation. "The small bedroom is ready." That night, after the woman and child were settled, Emma found Margaret at the desk, making calculations. "If we convert the old barn," Margaret said without looking up, "we could house 3 more families. The south pasture could be divided for small garden plots." A sanctuary, Emma realized, for those with nowhere else to go, like I was, like you were, in your way. Emma touched the ledger. "Can we afford it? With your cattle operation and my management?" "Yes." Margaret finally met her eyes. "Is this what you want?" "I wanted to be left alone," Emma admitted, "until you. Now I want this, us, whatever we build together." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, they stood beneath the cottonwoods behind the house. The old barn had been converted into comfortable quarters, now housing 2 families. The ranch hands, increased to 15, gathered in a semicircle, Hank among them. No minister presided. No law recognized what transpired. But the words they spoke held power nonetheless. "I claim you as my partner," Emma said, taking Margaret's hands in hers, "in this life and whatever comes after." "I claim you as my heart's choice," Margaret responded. "My protector, my equal, my home." They exchanged simple silver bands, forged by the blacksmith who asked no questions. The following dawn, they rode out together to check the herd, silhouettes merging against the rising sun. The Blackwood Wilcox Ranch, renamed Honor's Claim in official documents, had become known throughout the territory as a place where women could find refuge, work, and dignity. "Thaddeus would be apoplectic," Margaret commented, watching new cattle graze on what had once been Wilcox land. "Good," Emma replied simply, the last of her old bitterness fading with each passing season. As they crested the hill overlooking their expanded property, Emma realized the isolation she had once clutched so tightly had been not shelter but prison. In its place stood something stronger, a life built on choice, on trust, on love. Neither woman rode alone anymore. In the harsh landscapes of life, we often build walls around ourselves, believing isolation protects us from further pain. Yet this story reminds us that true strength isn't found in standing alone, but in the courage to extend a hand when justice demands it. The most profound acts of bravery aren't always grand gestures. Sometimes they're simply choosing to see another suffering and refusing to look away. when we risk our carefully constructed safety for someone else's dignity. We discover that what we thought was strength was merely survival. Perhaps the most revolutionary act in a broken world is to create sanctuary for others. The wounds we carry, those deep marks of loss and betrayal, need not define our futures. Instead, they can become the very foundation upon which we build compassion. Two souls, separately incomplete, can forge something more resilient than either could alone. This is the alchemy of human connection, transforming shared pain into shared purpose, turning isolation into community, and converting mere existence into a life of meaning. Thank you for joining us for today's story of courage and transformation. If something in this tale resonated with your own journey, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to join our storytelling community and never miss our next exploration of the human heart. Until next time, remember that sometimes the family we choose becomes our greatest strength. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.